Hey everyone, I'm here today with Dave Rensin. Super excited to talk about engineering management. Dave is a former director of engineering at Google and Amazon, and he's now the senior VP of engineering at Pendo. Dave, do you want to introduce yourself?
I think you pretty well covered it, Jacob. I'm Dave. Recently, of many years of Google. Before that, Amazon. Before that, lots of startups. Some awesome, some less than awesome, and now the SVP of engineering at Pendo. And really happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about engineering management and engineering manager interviews. Dave, in your experience, just to kick things off, what do you think makes the difference between a great engineering manager and a good engineering manager, or a bad engineering manager, if you want?
Well, okay. A bad engineering manager is a manager who either uh, doesn't consistently doesn't deliver on time, doesn't fulfill the promises his teams make, or is consistently losing people. Like one or both of those will make you a bad manager. A good manager is, or an acceptable manager is one who's roughly keeping their promises, delivering on time, and not losing their people. A really good manager, however, a great one, the ones I want to hire and the ones I want to grow and the ones I want to invest in are actually the ones who are spending a lot of time thinking about how to work themselves out of a job. Like who on their team are they going to grow to take their job over the next couple of years? I tell my managers, everyone I've ever managed, it's true that you can only ever optimize for one thing at a time, subject to any number of constraints, but you can only ever really optimize for one thing at a time. What I want my managers to optimize for is the growth of their people, working themselves out of a job. Because if you can work yourself out of a job, then I can find something really interesting for you. So you optimize for working yourself out of a job, subject to the constraint of, doing a pretty good job, keeping your promises with your deliverables. That's how I think of the difference between bad, sort of passable and really good engineering managers.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, I think that sort of brings me to like maybe two different questions here. One would be, how do you assess for that? So how would you sort of go about identifying an engineering manager who really brings those qualities to the table? And then maybe after that, we can talk a little bit about, as an engineering manager on the job, how do you sort of cultivate that sort of culture of growth and learning?
Okay, so let's take the first one first. So there are 2 points of assessment, right? There's the assessment when one of your engineers comes to you and says, well, I think maybe I want to try management. You have that conversation. That's one assessment. And then there's the assessment when you interview someone like an external candidate. When an engineer comes to me and says, hey, I think maybe I want to try management, I only really have one question, which is why. And I'm looking for one answer and only one answer or something very close to it. I want to hear the engineer say that they get a great deal of personal satisfaction from growing other people. Like they want to build people. They get the same satisfaction from building a person they do from like whatever shipping a great product. I want to hear something like that. That they have a real enjoyment of mentoring because managing's hard. Like there's a lot of tax you have to pay, performance management and compensation review and all the hiring and all the firing sometimes and all the stuff. If I don't hear something like that, then my answer is, well, let's find another way to grow you that isn't management because they're not suited to it, and I don't want to I don't want to bother with it. If I'm interviewing a candidate, that's actually really easy to detect. I'm going to ask every candidate, tell me the person you're most proud to have ever managed and how you grew them, and why you're proud. And people who grow people and are like look at that as an accomplishment. Like so and so started very junior, and now like she's really awesome, and now like she could do my job or whatever. Like we know all that stuff. It's top of mind for us, and we can spit that off the top of my head, off the top of your head rather. And so that's what I'm going to ask a manager. And if they think more than like 5 seconds about it, that's kind of a red flag for me. People who are really kind of passionate about that have that list in the top of their head.
Awesome. Are there any other sort of major questions, any favorite questions you have to ask engineering management candidates at that skill or others?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to ask every candidate to tell me about how they deal with jerk employees. Anyone who's ever managed for any period of time has had an engineer who was an excellent engineer, like super individually productive, but was kind of a jerk. Was mean to people or dismissive or just not a good person to work with, let's say. And so I want to, I'm going to ask a lot of questions about Tell me about a time when that's been true for you, and then tell me how you managed it. And did it resolve and didn't it resolve? And how long did you have to wait before you finally figured out this person wasn't going to be worth, it wasn't worth the friction. And you know, had to encourage them to seek another opportunity, like that kind of a thing.
Mhm.
Um, I think that's a pretty common question. I think every engineering manager should be expected to tell a story about how they resolved conflicting, you know, business goals, two groups who needed something that were just, you couldn't do both at the same time. And how did they resolve it? I think every engineering manager should be prepared to talk about a time when they couldn't deliver on a promise and what they did about it, or if they had to step into a dumpster fire and what they did about it. And even if it didn't resolve well, I think everyone who interviews generally should be ready to talk about their biggest personal or professional, excuse me, failure. So as a manager, where did you fail most? Where have you failed most in your career, and what did you learn from it? I mean, that's what we're all really looking for. We want to know, is this someone we can trust with other people, you know, that's going to be good to them? We want to know that it's not someone you can't prove to me that you can deliver on time, not in an interview. Not really. You can tell me stories about how you did, but whatever. Um, but you can prove to me that you can learn from mistakes and learn from failure. And that's really the thing I care about. Because, you know, it's not so much that I don't want you to make a mistake. I just don't want you to make the same one twice. I tell people all the time, like, the sin is not in the failure. The sin is in failing to notice. So, you know, I want to know that you're good at noticing and correcting.
Yeah. Okay. Going back to this idea of sort of growing people, do you have any lessons there? Any recommendations for how to do that well as an engineering manager?
A couple of things. So, if there are things you don't like to do, there's actually a pretty good bet that that's a growth opportunity for someone else on your team. You should just ask, like, I have this thing I have to do, which I don't really love doing. Is there anyone here who would like to learn how to do it? And, you know, very often you'll find a volunteer because they'll be like, great, I would love to learn. I mean, maybe it's not what they want to do all the time, but I'd love to learn how to do it. Um, I'll tell you that I have weekly one-on-ones with my directs and at least bi-weekly one-on-ones with my skips, no matter how big my orgs. And those meetings have nothing to do with any of the tactical things of their job. I don't want to hear about project updates or any, I mean, if there's some really burning thing, I guess we can talk about it. But that time is about, like, how are we doing growing that person? And then in turn, I expect every week or every other week or whatever, that person to tell me how much closer they are to working themselves out of a job. You know, Jacob, are you any, you know, were you able to get any closer this week to figuring out who on your team is going to eventually succeed you, even if that's in 2 years? Well, I've narrowed it down, I think, to 3 candidates. Tell me about them. And then, you know, we'll talk about them and tell me why you think that. Great. Now tell me, what kind of growth opportunities do you think are on the horizon that you could give them to test whether or not, you know, who would be appropriate, right? Like, we're going to have that conversation pretty much every week.
Are there any other criteria that you're thinking about when you're evaluating an engineering manager?
Well, those are the big ones. Like, I want to know, can you grow people, and can you recognize problems and learn from them? And those are the big things. Kind of everything else, I feel like, if there's a gap, we can train you, sort of a thing. You know, I really am looking for 3 things when I'm interviewing somebody, whether it's an engineering manager or an individual contributor or anyone. I'm really looking to measure 3 things because they're really only 3 things. You know, all successful people have some combination of 3 traits. Um, they're conscientious, they're intelligent, and they're naive. Meaning they have enough naivete left that they're willing to walk into a hard thing without really realizing how hard it is. Otherwise, most of us would never try something hard. Conscientious enough not to run away when they discover what they've really taken on, and smart enough, you know, just smart enough to eventually figure it out in time. You know, we all want to work with the smartest people and all that good stuff, but, you know, actually, I, I want to work with the best human. That's really who I want to work with. I want to work with people who are uh, ruthlessly honest with themselves about how they're doing, um, and are willing to be ruthlessly honest with me about how they're doing and how I'm doing, and then, you know, open to adjusting and growing, because then you can just invest in people at that point.
Yeah. When it comes to sort of showing humanity, when you're thinking about failures that you're being asked about, how would you sort of talk about your biggest failure in a way that sort of shows that you have learned something, or that that you're trying to improve things over time?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of ways to do it, right? I mean, if you're an engineering manager, the easiest way to do it is to talk about a promise you made that you couldn't keep. Yes, we gave an estimate of X and it turned out we were wrong, or we lost somebody on the team or whatever. But we were wrong. It was our fault. And we're going to be 3 months late. How long did it take you to discover that? It took me, whatever, 3 weeks. Then what did you do? Well, I went and talked to my boss and I talked to my stakeholders and I gave them the bad news. Okay, well, now they've lost some trust in your team. How did you rebuild that trust? Well, we had dashboards and weekly updates and face-to-faces if that's what was required. And, you have to show people that you can earn it, whatever. Okay, tell me about the postmortem you conducted, or the retrospective, or whatever the terminology your organization uses. What did you learn? What action items did you get? You can ask a lot of pretty pointed questions, which will show you pretty quickly whether that's a real example or something that's sort of making up on the spot.
Awesome. It's super interesting that you're sort of talking about some of these frameworks or actions that engineering managers take. You mentioned one-on-ones, you mentioned postmortems and stand-ups and things like that. What are the most important ones in your mind that every engineering manager should sort of know about or be able to talk about and sort of take from one organization to another?
I will tell you that I think the biggest mistake managers make, well, people make in general, organizations make, but managers in particular, is they're too quick to schedule meetings. I tell my teams, meetings are a bug, not a feature. The only legitimate purpose for a group meeting, not a one-on-one, one-on-one's a different thing, because let's say you and I are having a conversation about your growth. But the only legitimate purpose for a group meeting is to make a decision or resolve a dispute. Do everything else in a doc. Because it's durable and it's searchable and editable and remixable, and that you have to recognize that the majority of people who are going to have to live with the consequence of your decision aren't going to be in the meeting and probably won't even be at the company right now. And so I do think that's the biggest mistake people make, is they should really be more aggressive about slashing meetings from their calendar. Did you get all that?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, we got all of that.
Okay.
So in terms of the most important qualities, you mentioned humanity. It sounds like communication maybe is also another important one in terms of the way you communicate with your team, the manner in which you do it, or the frequency with which you do it. Are there any other sort of big buckets of things? For example, how important do you think technical competence is for a manager? And does that vary based on the type of team you're managing, or sort of the level at which you're managing people?
There are different views on that particular topic. My particular view is every manager in an engineering organization has to maintain some technical competence. It doesn't mean that you're going to code every day, because you're not. I can't code every day in production. It's just not possible to do. But in my opinion, I can't be a good leader if I can't have a principled conversation with my teams about some architecture they're proposing. If I can't stand in front of my CEO or our VCs or whoever and explain in pretty simple language how what we do works, and then how it connects to the user value, and then how it can, what it costs to do those kinds of things, then I'm just pushing paper at that point. So in my opinion, this is my philosophy, and other people disagree. There are some people who are very much in favor of pure people managers as managers, but I'm not one of them. I think every engineering manager, every manager in an engineering organization has to maintain some technical competence. The other reason is every really good engineering manager that I admire, that I've looked up to in my career and admire, at some point in their career, usually a couple of places, has stepped back and stopped managing for 6 months or a year to just go be an IC on some really complicated thing, because they just needed to flush out their brain and reset. And, that's not an option that's available to you if you're a pure people manager who drifts away from your technical moorings, let's say. The other thing that, to the question, the first part of your question, the other mistake I see managers make, new leaders really, it's actually not that hard, in my opinion, to be a manager if you inherently care about people. There's just a few basic rules. And one of the rules is, you want to work with smart people, so don't bullshit them. Just don't do it. Every question you get asked can be answered with exactly one of three things. The answer, if you know it, I don't know if you don't, or, and this is the hard one that people don't like to do, I know the answer to your question, but I'm not going to answer it, or I can't answer it because dot, 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 or some combination therein. Like, I can answer your question up to here. After this, I will acknowledge I know more, but can't tell you or won't tell you because of whatever valid reason. But never hand wave your employees. Just don't do it. It doesn't make sense. They're smart. They all know that you're doing it. It just makes you look bad. Another good, I think, rule of thumb is if you discover you're wrong, you should really try to be the first one to raise your hand and admit it. And you should try to do it in the context where you made the mistake. Like if you and I are in a meeting, let's say it's just you and me and not people watching, and you like X, and I go, no, actually, I think it's Y. And then I discover that, no, you're right, it's X. You're going to get an email from me like, hey, dude, guess what? You were right. I was wrong. It's X. And if it's you, me, and three other people, then, the five of us are going to get an email saying that. And if it's in a company all hands, the company's getting an email and so forth. So, I'm going to try really hard to not say something that turns out to be wrong on this YouTube recording. Otherwise, I'm going to have to come back just so I can apologize.
Yeah, we'll have you back on to fix any errors. Do you have any recommendations for people who are either in the midst of an engineering management interview or who are considering transitioning to engineering management and are curious about how to do that?
Those are two different answers. If you're in the midst of an engineering interview, if you're interviewing with some company, those things we talked about earlier, like tell me about a time you failed and what did you learn, and those things, you should have 5 or 6 examples you have thought of ahead of time, and you should not recycle them during the interview. And nothing looks worse in an interview for a manager if you're leaning on the same 1 or 2 examples for everyone you're talking to, even if they're applicable, because it just shows up in the written feedback like you're an inch deep. And if you've been doing it more than a couple of years, you should have a bunch of examples of all the different things. So that would be my first. That's an easy thing for people to trip over. That sort of shooting yourself in the foot. Don't do that. If you're an individual contributor and you're thinking about becoming a manager, my advice to you is you should talk to whoever it is you have to talk to, your manager or HR, or whoever it is who has to approve it for you. You should talk about it as an experiment, and you should think of it in those terms. I would like to try this. I don't know if I will be good at it, and you don't know if I will be good at it because I've never done it before. So how could you? And I want to make it easy for me to go back to being an IC if I don't like it, and for you to tell me to go back to being an IC if you think I'm not good at it. So why don't we just go in and structure this as a 6-month experiment and describe it that way to the team, that you're going to give me or whatever. And then in 6 months, we'll sit down and have a very frank conversation and ask, how did the experiment go? I really do think, because, I think a lot of engineers, when they think about management, think they're making a permanent choice, like having a kid or whatever. It's something you can never not do once you've done it. And that really isn't true. But the best thing to do is to have that conversation up front with the person you're talking to, because you want to make that transition, and also make it easy and low cost for them, because it's a risk for them too. You've never managed people before. Maybe you've been a tech lead, maybe they've even seen you mentor people, but they've never seen you have a hard performance management conversation or a compensation conversation or whatever. So, you should make it easy for them to have an off ramp too if it's not working out well. That's just good for everybody. So that's I think my generic piece of advice for the IC who thinks like maybe she wants to become a manager.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it also gives both people sort of a trial run too, right? It lets you sort of test out whether you actually enjoy management, because sometimes it's not always exactly what it seems.
It never is, right? But that's part of being naive.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dave. Do you have anything that you'd like to end with, or any other thoughts, either about engineering management or anything else?
I don't think so. I'm sure I have tons of thoughts on things. I'm one of those people who has an opinion about everything, especially the things he doesn't know anything about. So, I'm in the usual places. You can follow me at Twitter. I guess I'm at D Rensin, or and other places too. I'm on Medium and whatever. And it's been awesome to talk to you. And I don't know. I hope folks find this useful.
All right. Thank you so much, Dave. And good luck to everyone out there on your interviews.
Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons below to let us know that this video was valuable for you. And of course, check out hundreds more videos just like this at tryexponent.com. Thanks for watching and good luck on your upcoming interview.